Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Juanca David and in this video we will start a hands-on guide with Modelio Tosca Designer. For those new to Tosca, we will begin with basic ideas. Our goal today is to understand Tosca, use Tosca Designer, and build your first application model. In today's complex world of cloud, fog, and edge systems, putting apps to use and managing them can be hard due to many different tools and manual steps. TOSCA, which stands for Topology and Orchestration Standard for Cloud Apps, gives an open way to describe your apps clearly so they can be moved easily and computers can understand them. Here we can see Modelio Tosca Designer showing an empty project. On the left side, we see the Model Explorer. On the right side, we see the main modeling canvas, and on the bottom, we see the property panel. Let us begin by explaining some basic TOSCA concepts. First, we have TOSCA service topologies. This is the full plan of your application. It shows all parts of your application, from software to hardware, and how they work together. Next, we have node types. This can be seen as the reusable parts of your application, like classes in coding. For example, you might have a compute node type for a virtual machine or a container, or a software component node for your application services. Each node type shows its properties, settings you can change, and its capabilities, which are the things it can do, its requirements, which are the things that it needs to work. Building from node types, we make topology templates. These are specific examples of your node types, linked together to form a real application setup. This is what you will build with your eyes in the designer. Then we bring in policies. Policies are rules or limits that guide how your application or its parts act or are. For example, a policy might say how your application grows or special security rules it must follow. Finally, we have triggers. Triggers are things that, when they happen, make a policy do a certain action. For example, if your application CPU usage goes over a certain level, a trigger might start a scaling policy to add more parts. They show the if this, then that rule for your policies. Let us proceed now to build your first model with TOSCA Designer. First, let's make sure we have the correct setup. We are going to add the TOSCA Designer model to the model catalog of Modelio open source. For this, we go to the configuration menu and then select Model Catalog. We click on Add New Model, and then we look for the JMDAC file of TOSCA Designer. We are now ready to create our project. Let's go to File and then click Create a Project. And now let's deploy the TOSCA Designer model from the catalog into our newly created project. Let's go to Configuration, Models, Add, and choose the TOSCA Designer model from the catalog. You should now have TOSCA Designer and TOSCA Library showing in your Model Explorer. To check that the model has been correctly deployed, you can right-click on the root package that's been created for you and check that the TOSCA Designer menu is there. We can now proceed to create the model. This is the primary canvas, and inside it you can create a service template. Service template is where you create your node types. So let us create our first node type. Let's call it MYRTUS software component. And then let's click on the Tosca property page below to check the properties that we can set. In the right from, you can check all the node types that are predefined in the Tosca standard library. In our case, this is a software component. Let us now create a property for our node type. We'll call it Docker image and symbolizes the actual Docker container that is going to contain the software that is going to implement the functionality of our component. Let us create now a second node type. MYRTUS camera feed, and this time we're going to add requirements and capabilities. First we add that, and then we add just one requirement in this case, face detection service. At the right side, under the symbol banner, you have several display options. We can use check for the requirements container and make it display as a list. And we can also choose to use the icons for the requirements inside. Then we do the same thing for capabilities. We add a container for our capabilities. And we add a single capability. In this case, it's a web service, since we're going to have an endpoint for our camera feed. We can use this button over here to copy the style from one container to the other. So it both shows as a list and using the icons. Then we can set up the properties here, for instance, the capability type. In this case, it's an endpoint, so we can choose endpoint from the TOSCA standard library. Now that we have created all of our node types, we proceed to create our topology template diagram. We right-click on the service template, TOSCA Designer, topology template diagram. In this diagram, we are going to instantiate those node types we just created and say how we are going to deploy them. First, we create, for instance, a red light detection node, which is going to have the type of our MYRTUS software component. Let's create a second node type called sensor tracker, which is also going to be a software component. At any time to have autocomplete, you just type control space and you will have the options. In our case, MYRTUS software component. Then we're going to have the actual cameras. So we can add a node that is going to instantiate MYRTUS compute. In this case, an edge device with computing capabilities. Then we can proceed to have the relationships. Both of them are going to be hosted. We double click each one of the relationships we just created, and we mention the relationship type. In this case, it's the fact that they're going to be hosted on here. We can also add a name if we want it to be displayed on the diagram. Now instantiate the node type properties inside our node templates. Here we're going to create the properties for Docker image. that we previously defined, and we are going to assign it a value. In the property panel, we specify to which node type property we are making reference to. As you can see in the list, we can see all the other node type properties that have been defined in the standard Tosca library. We can now go back to our service template diagram, and we can have a snapshot of the topology template diagram inside this diagram. So we see everything in a complete view. It is time now to add our policies. Let us create some space here. And just like before, we will add a container for our policies. We add one of the policies. I'm going to call it edge low power mode. Then we're going to have a trigger inside this policy. Just like we did before for requirements and capabilities, we can choose to have the triggers shown in the list mode. So I'm going to copy the style using this button over here with the brush and then copy it here. Then we can double click or use the property panel to set the properties. So I'm going to call it edge low power mode trigger, and I'm going to declare at nighttime set the frame rate of cameras to 10 frames per second in order to save power. Here we would have a condition that you can express in any kind of formal language. So for instance, in a Python format. Otherwise, we should just leave it at 30, the default. Moving fast forward, we now have completed our diagrams for service template with policies, node types, and the topology template diagram, which we have also completed with other node templates. All of these software components, which all are hosted in the MYRTUS compute or the camera host uh, computer component. We can also look at all these elements in our Model Explorer, as we see on the left side, and we can rearrange them as we see fit. We are now ready to deploy this application. We can click on the root node, we go to TOSCA Designer and use export command. Here we're going to export the entire model as a Caesar file, which is the standard data exchange format for TOSCA topologies. We can use whatever name we like. The file has been generated successfully and it is ready now for deployment. Note that in some cases, according to the TOSCA runtimes, you would need to edit this file in order to complete it with more deployment information, including security information, authentication, and other native deployment artifacts that you would need to add, for instance, code or additional build files. This ends our guide. In this session, we have learned basic TOSCA concepts, used the TOSCA Designer, built a simple application model from the start with node types and a topology template, added policies and triggers, and made it ready to use by saving it as a Caesar file. Thank you for watching and happy modeling!